सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hi and welcome back to this week's edition of Crosshairs, the program at ThePrint where we look at an interesting national security issue or regional security issue each week. This week we've been looking a lot at Pakistan and the region in recent episodes, but I thought I'd turn our attention this week to a fascinating story my colleague Suchetveer Singh had done on Ishar Singh, who 127 years ago today, that's Friday, won a Victoria Cross for his heroic battle against tribals in what is today called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and was then called the Northwest Frontier Province. He was the only Indian in between the two world wars who won a Victoria Cross. And perhaps, Suchet, I'll go to you first just for a brief nugget to tell us what his life was about and why he was a significant figure.
So he was born 127 years ago in Hoshiarpur district, what is today Hoshiarpur district in Punjab. And he was part of the 28th Punjabis, which is an infantry regiment of the British Indian Army. And in their campaign in Waziristan in 1921, in a place near Hyder Kutch, he was part of basically assisting a supply convoy. And he was number one on he was a sepoy, and he was number one on the US gun, which is essentially the person who fires the right machine gun. And amidst this convoy going, the Pashtun tribes attacked them, and there was a severe attack. And so obviously they lost control, many were wounded, he was hit by a bullet. But amidst all this, he mustered the courage and started to counterattack, and there was hand-to-hand combat, and there was things like that. And so basically then he took control back of the US gun, and consequently, instead of, even though because he had a bullet wound and he was advised to go to the medical unit, instead of doing that, what he did was he ensured that he went to the medics and told them where the other injured soldiers were so that they could give care. And consequently, then he also acted as a shield in what we've read, in fact, while they were dressing other wounded soldiers. And then for this, King George V gave him a Victoria Cross in November of 1921. And he became the first Sikh to get a Victoria Cross.
A fascinating story, and I'm joined here by Mandeep Bajwa, a fantastic chronicler of all things to do with the Indian military, who's, my go-to person on things, military history. Mandeep, the question I wanted to ask you first, is obviously, how are we to relate to these great pre-independence figures of Indian military history? I mean, this was a soldier fighting in the greatest traditions of the Indian Army, but he was also a soldier fighting people who were part of British India and fighting against the British. How should we look at these people? Are they part of our tradition, or were they agents of the British?
Well, that's a complicated question, but we have to think of it in holistic terms. And there are a number of issues connected with that. One is, they were, after all, at the end of the day, our men. People born on our soil, who lived here, who lived their lives, got educated, joined the army, got married, raised children, raised families, and came back, retired, came back, lived in their villages, and then died here. I mean, their roots are in this soil, and their dust enriches this soil. So how do we disown them now? And don't forget, it is this tradition set by Ishar Singh, set by Prem Bhagat VC, set by Rishpal Ram VC, set by Chelu Ram VC, which sustains the Indian Army now. And I think the founding fathers of the nation took a conscious decision at the time of independence to maintain this tradition. I mean, they were determined it should become a republic. and not remain in dominion. But they want to retain these traditions because they saw merit in them. And in the case of Ishar Singh specifically, you mustn't forget he was fighting against the tribesmen of the northwest frontier, the traditional invaders of India, and people who are still now fighting as guest militants in Kashmir. So they were India's enemies at that time. They remain India's enemies, and I don't see a future where these people will be friendly towards us. And then at the end of the day, now we want to, sit at the high table of the Committee of Nations. So it's worthwhile to remind everybody in the world. I mean, we must remember that the United Nations was founded by the victors of World War II. But we weren't included in that because we were a colony. But soon thereafter, we became an independent nation and joined the United Nations in our own right. But if we want to, be part of G7, we want to be part of all the other Gs, which, are very popular nowadays. I mean, we have assumed the chairmanship of the G20. It's being tom-tommed a lot nowadays. So we got to remind the world that look at the tremendous sacrifices we made in the fight against fascism and for democracy. So I think it's worthwhile remembering those battles, those victories, those sacrifices, those contributions. And then, if you remember, in the First World War, the mainstream political opinion was strongly in favor of helping the British.
Right. I just want, if I can interrupt for a second, Mandeep, I mean, that's the question I wanted to ask. The First World War, you said it's, important to remember our sacrifices. Now, in the First World War, many people actively recruited for soldiers. Our national leadership, even Gandhiji, despite his later pacifism, asked people to go and fight to show that they were a responsible nation. And that's great, but we ended up being quite bitterly let down, leading to a lot of tensions at home, and in fact the British using the British Indian Army to kill Indians in what is today your state or our side of Punjab. How does one deal with this? Indians on different sides of the story, Indians in the British Army. Can you tell us a little bit about that First World War experience and what happened afterwards?
Well, the mainstream political opinion was strongly in favor of aiding the British because it was felt that in return, out of gratitude, the British would grant us dominion status after the war. And the British probably did lead our leaders to believe that this would happen. And secondly, our leader also felt that we should show the British that we are able to shoulder the burden of imperial defense through recruiting, through contribution of men, material, money, and everything. And unfortunately, this was the British probably never had any sort of inkling towards that. They never wanted to give India independence, but they led us on. And then you found that there was heavy recruiting, particularly in Punjab, and a lot of promises were made. And at the end of the war, the bulk of those men were sent home, and that whole disgruntled mass of peasantry and the bitterness. You found that November 1918, the war finished. By April, Punjab was up in flames. Jallianwala Bagh, the aerial strafing of Gujranwala, martial law, floggings, the whole lot, and all that, the repression, and which all happened, and that was the low point of the British Raj, and out of that grew the determination which brought us independence. I mean, everybody, the violent revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh and Chandrasekhar Azad also took birth. From those, what should I say, the struggle in Punjab or the troubles in Punjab or the suffering of the people in Punjab. And the non-violent freedom fighters also took inspiration from what all happened here in Punjab. And that's how this country got...
So sorry to cut you. So talking about Punjab, last year, I'm not sure if you had read, but there was this research done by certain professors and historians in the United Kingdom where they found documents of 320,000 soldiers from Punjab who had served for the Allied forces in World War I, and their documents were lying in a basement somewhere in Lahore, and nobody even knew about them. So their contribution had gone unknown, unrecognized, and just unheard of. How do you put that with what you're talking about right now, the major contributions of Punjab and Punjabis specifically?
Punjab's contribution was large, and the British drew most of their recruits from Punjab. And in fact, some of the recruitment was forcible also. And, quotas were allotted to civil officials, quotas were allotted to police officials, quotas were allotted to, even this term is even used nowadays in Punjab, local notables, the landowners and businessmen and others, pillars of the British Raj. And they all delivered and but it left a lot of bitterness. Many people were not willing to be recruited, particularly after the heavy casualties on the Western Front in France and in Iraq, what was called Mesopotamia in those days. And but the recruitment was carried out. Nevertheless, the quota of recruits from Punjab was produced, and that bitterness at being forcibly recruited, and the fact that at the end of the war they were sent home with a token payment and no pensions, is what spurred the freedom struggle. And in the Second World War, you'll be interested to know that the British didn't make the same mistake. They made the recruitment more broad-based and avoided the Punjab pitfall, as I call it.
If I may move this on a little, do you foresee a danger today where soldiers are being recruited under a new scheme where they will not have pensions, where they'll be in service for a shorter time, that some of what happened with the British after the First World War might one day again confront our army if soldiers feel they are not being properly treated and looked after in return for their services to the nation?
I wouldn't like to make any forecasts at this stage, but I would like to point out that in the recent Himachal elections, the Agnipath scheme was a factor. It was a political issue, and particularly in the catchment area in Himachal, the heavily recruited area districts of Kangra, Munna, Hamirpur, and Mandi, which together comprise 35 out of the 68 assembly seats in Himachal. It was a major political issue. And the slogan being repeated there was, Ya te pakki naukri do, ya fauj nu kar bhejo. Either give us permanent jobs or send soldiers home. So, and as we know, the ruling party was voted out in the Himachal elections. And this is bound to become a next issue in Haryana, in Punjab, in Uttarakhand, and Western UP, and in Maharashtra, in certain areas in Karnataka and Kerala and Tamil Nadu also. And this is something which there must be a rethink about that. I mean, if the people of the country are at the grassroots level are rejecting the scheme, then what sort of future will the scheme have? So, this is something to be thought about. And I mean, this scheme thought of in haste and virtually rammed down the throats of the establishment. It definitely needs a rethink. And let's see about.
Moving back to the question we had about, Indians being ambiguous about parts of their history. After Ishar Singh's heroic struggle against the Pashtuns, we had the Second World War, of course. And today, the 30th of December, as we're shooting this, as we're filming this program, is another anniversary date. It's the date the Indian flag was unfurled in the Andamans by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Again, a great deal of ambiguity and confusion there because Indians fighting, of course, on both sides of the Second World War. How does the modern Indian army come to terms with the fact that, Indians were on both sides of this struggle? And what sense should we make of it? Which is our military tradition, the INA or the British Indian Army? To which should we look to for our traditions and our military heritage, Mandeep?
Again, this is a complex question, but we must approach this in the spirit with which the founding fathers approached independence and the problems they confronted them after independence. That was, they saw everything in a spirit of reconciliation. That the soldiers, policemen, civil servants, and jail officials, and others who served the British were welcomed into the new India. And you found that although we must realize this, we must recognize this, that nearly every Indian in those days was a nationalist. I mean, they were doing jobs for the British, but all of them wanted independence. I can't think of anybody else except maybe a few diehard Rai Bahadurs or Khan Bahadurs who wanted the British to stay on. Everybody wanted independence and everybody was happy, and it all worked out smoothly. There was no thing. I mean, we didn't hear cases of freedom fighters confronting the police officers who had rained lathi blows on them or whatever. So it was in that spirit, and you see, they all recognized that they needed a strong standing army and something which will be of use to the country. So they didn't want to dismantle it completely. As regards the INA, I think there's a few things in the INA, particularly the reforms brought about by General Mohan Singh, the founder of the INA, which are worth remembering even now. He did away with all religious institutions, all religious teachers. There were common prayers. He did away with separate messing. All people from all religions sat together and ate together. And he did away with class composition and many other things. We did away with the different kinds of commissions and made into one commission. He did away with the cadre of junior commissioned officers. And these reforms were carried forward by Netaji when he took over the command of the INA. But we must remember it was Mohan Singh who initiated them. So those things are worth remembering now. And maybe we should also put into effect some of those reforms. But the political leadership was clear that it was the Indian Army. And mind you, it's the Indian Army. It was never the British Indian Army. It was always the Indian Army. And as opposed to the British Army, in fact, there was a huge rivalry between the British officers of the British service and the British officers of the Indian Army. I mean, they never saw eye to eye. So they were clear that they wanted the Indian Army to stay. That's why they did not take back the INA, except for maybe, I think, say about 30, 40 people were taken back. The rest were given other jobs. And I think, the contrary to what people believe, the INA were all resettled. They all got freedom fighters' pensions. Whereas most of those who fought in the Indian Army during World War II didn't get pensions because they didn't have the requisite color service. But that tradition, I think the old...
If I could just cut you there, talking about tradition, I'd just like to go back to Ishar Singh, the story of Ishar Singh and his legacy and the larger sort of effects that has. How do you think that there could be sort of a better form or perhaps a new medium of remembrance of all these soldiers who served in World War I and World War II, especially given that many of the wars they fought were not in India, they weren't on these lands. Now many of their families are scattered all across the world. So does it make it even more complicated to know about their stories and to have any form of remembrance for them?
The one form of remembrance is, of course, the India Gate, which has names of 34,000 Indians who fell during the First World War, and the third Anglo-Afghan War of 1919. And that could well be memorial to all the Indian soldiers who fell between 1759, which is when the first Indian Army unit was raised, and 1947. That could well be converted into that. But otherwise, the political leadership has also come to terms. You find that now the Indian political leadership for the last, say, 15 years or so has been, probably longer, has been attending remembrance ceremonies in France, in Belgium, in Italy, and in Turkey, in Gallipoli, other places. So they do recognize that they were our men. They were our men, and we should honor them. And we just can't, sort of do away with our past. How do you do it? I mean, it is so complicated. How do you decide? What is the determinant to decide that these were Indians and these were foreigners? Look at all the internecine wars between the various kingdoms in India, which lasted right till the 19th century. And who among them were Indian, who were foreigners? So I think it's best to keep it as it was and learn the appropriate lessons and move on and honor these people's service and their thing. I mean, we took on the burden of paying pensions to the Indian Army, the other services also from the British, and we have maintained that. And this way, I think that should be the correct way. And as for Ishar Singh, one little thing, a little nugget of information. Ishar Singh rose to the highest possible rank in his cadre. He became an honorary captain. And at the end of his service, he was amongst the 4 Indian orderly officers who were deputed, to attend upon the British king for a year. Annually they were renewed. Different 4 would go every year in the late 30s. And, they would be stationed in London and be in attendance upon the king on ceremonial and other occasions. And he came back, I think, in 1939 to his village and died in the early 60s. And his battalion, in fact, you'll be interested to know that his battalion had 2 more VCs. In World War II, they got 2 more VCs, and it went to Pakistan.
He also was conferred the Order of British India by the East India Company. So he was, I think, among the very few who had the title of Sardar Bahadur and the Victoria Cross.
That because of his services and all, and saying, I mean, well, he did well. I'm rank of honorary captain, and as I said, he was one of the 4 Indian orderly officers.
Talking about Ishar Singh, and I think there's a memorial in his village. Recently, I think, was it this in 21 or the year before, the government had initiated some sort of review on our contribution to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Just wanted to know what you thought about that amidst all this.
Well, I'm all for it. I mean, let's save 4 crore rupees a year, and we've got so many other resources. There's so many companies and others and all who can take on this job of looking after our graves and our memorials and commemorations and all. Let them do it, and let's let the government or the army come up with an alternative. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, therefore, 4 crore rupees a year, we get the best possible commemorations for our fallen in so many countries. And you go to Italy, you go to Egypt, you go to Libya, you go to France, Belgium. You find Indians are honored there because of the visible signs of their sacrifices are there. Or what alternative are they trying to put in place? Have they found out something? Do they honor, they commemorate our own dead in our own country in the way that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has done? I think this is ridiculous. You cannot get details of Indian martyrs in our own country from the official agencies. But you go to the website of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, with a couple of clicks, you'll find complete details of all the Indian martyrs from both the world wars. So I don't know what sort of short-sighted policy this is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, it's totally ridiculous.
A final question, Mandeep, since we're almost out of time. But it's a question about the legacy of these wars for Punjab particularly. At the time Punjab started contributing large numbers of soldiers to the Indian Army in the colonial era, it was a pretty backward peasant society, and these soldiers going abroad, encountering the world, encountering, if I may say, white people on the basis of equality in the battlefield, these must have had a profound cultural impact. In what ways did this change Punjab? And in a way, the sacrifice helped not just the families of those soldiers because of whatever pensions or rewards they got, but changed Punjab itself for the better.
Well, I'll just pick up two things, two of the changes brought about by the experience of these men, particularly in France and Belgium. One is that, all these men, they came back and most of them were sent home with token payments and no pensions. But many of them got, allotments of land in the new canal colonies, which certainly brought up their economic and social status. These men, they came back, what they brought back with them mainly was ideas. You found that up till the First World War came about as a result of, the European nationalism, the effects of nationalism. So, they found that the strong nationalism in France, in Britain, and in Belgium also, others, which filled them with wonder that, look, here we are not fighting for our own freedom. And mind you, all these soldiers were treated very well in France and Britain because the people felt that they had come to defend them. So, the ideas they brought back contributed to the freedom struggle. Second, this thing is, they found that, that most of the population in France and Britain, or maybe Belgium also, was educated, and particularly the women. We found that in the period 1919 to 1939, a lot of new schools sprang up in the rural areas of Punjab, and a lot of education of girls also started. I mean, the beginnings of education for girls started in the thing. So, these were two major changes, major things which were brought about by the ideas brought in by these soldiers based on their experiences on the Western Front. And other fronts also contributed. But it was mainly, France is the home of, the slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity. And what they found, and they found that the women were up front. None of them were in parda. They were taking an equal role in work and other things, And I think there were a few cases of French women coming back as wives to Punjab. And of course, there was a lot of fraternization also and other things. And what they were also particularly, impressed was that contrary to the way the British behaved with us in India, the natives in Britain held these soldiers in very high esteem. Because, all the wounded used to be sent back to Britain. Particularly, there was this famous Indian hospital in the Brighton Pavilion. And they were very, very well looked after by staff and by the locals. And, while they were convalescing, many of them went on tours of Britain and, London or whatever, and they were treated as heroes everywhere. So that had a profound thing. And a lot of this has been brought out in the, by Professor David O'Misi. In his book, he did a study of, the censorship of letters of Indian soldiers and compiled that into a book. So what they wrote back was very interesting. All these things came out vividly in those letters. And most of them, of course, written by, the munshis or the more educated, saying all the clerks and all. But those ideas and those thoughts and, the things were all there. So, these are two things which I felt, the most profound sort of changes brought about by things. There were others also.
Thank you so much, Mandeep. We'll, at the print, we've always looked at military history. It's not always a fashionable topic these days. But just to remind viewers who may have joined us towards the end of this program, this conversation was based around an article my colleague Suchet Veer Singh had done about the sacrifice of Ishar Singh, born 137 years ago, and who won the Victoria Cross for his for his role in battling the Mahsood tribes on what used to be called the Northwest Frontier Province, now on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And from Mandeep Bajwa, military historian, we developed a fascinating we received a fascinating education on how the changes that came about because of Indian soldiers serving in the colonial Indian army, not only these were not just some sort of agents of servitude, but individuals who formed experiences that were to give the freedom movement life and to transform our country itself. I'm sure we'll come back to this conversation time and time again, but thank you, Sucheth, for joining me, and thank you so much, Mandeep Bajwa, for making the time for us today. Thank you for joining Crosshairs, and hopefully we'll be back with you next weekend.